The office building was still waking up when the janitor pushed his cleaning cart into the break room. The air carried the smell of fresh paper, floor polish, and coffee brewing somewhere nearby. It was early, too early for most of the staff, but not for him. Being a single father meant starting his shift before the sun and finishing only after the last employee had left. He moved quietly, wiping tables, refilling paper towels, and checking the trash bins. As he bent down to pick up a crumpled napkin near the counter, his eyes caught a small detail. A steaming cup of coffee sat in the middle of the table. It wasn't in one of the usual company mugs, but in a plain white disposable cup. The lid was on, but something about it felt off. He paused, staring at it longer than he should have. He had seen hundreds of cups of coffee during his job, but this one gave him a strange feeling. The door opened, and in walked the CEO. He was a man who carried himself with authority, sharp suit, polished shoes, and a look that told everyone he had little time for nonsense. His assistants followed behind, flipping through folders, whispering updates about meetings and reports. The CEO barely glanced around the room as he reached straight for the cup of coffee sitting on the counter. The janitor froze. His heart raced. Something inside screamed that this wasn't right. The CEO's fingers touched the lid, ready to lift it, and that was when the janitor's voice cut through the room. "Don't drink that coffee." The sound was sharp, sudden, and louder than he had intended. It startled everyone. The assistants stopped talking. A few gasps filled the air. The CEO turned slowly, his hand still hovering over the cup, his face marked with shock and disbelief. For a moment, the entire room felt silent except for the humming of the vending machine in the corner. The janitor stood still, his mop in one hand, his eyes locked on the cup. He didn't move closer, didn't back away either. He just repeated himself, this time calmer but firm. "Please don't drink that coffee." The assistants looked at each other, whispering. One of them rolled her eyes and muttered that the janitor was overstepping. Another smirked, trying not to laugh at the absurdity of a cleaner stopping the CEO from drinking his morning coffee. The CEO's face hardened. He was not used to being challenged, especially not by the janitor, whose presence most people barely noticed. His voice cut through the silence. "And why not?" The janitor swallowed, his throat dry, but his tone stayed steady. "Something's not right with it." Laughter broke out at the back. One of the assistants whispered that the janitor must have lost his mind. Another pulled out her phone, pretending to check messages, but clearly recording the scene. The janitor ignored them. His focus stayed on the cup. He didn't care about being mocked, not when every instinct inside him was warning of danger. The CEO looked down at the coffee again, then back at the janitor. His brow furrowed. He wasn't a man who tolerated interruptions, and this interruption was as bold as it was strange. But there was something about the janitor's voice that carried more than fear. It carried certainty. Security entered the room after hearing the raised voices. They glanced at the CEO, waiting for a command. One of them stepped forward toward the janitor. The tension in the room was heavy. The assistants expected the janitor to be dragged out and fired on the spot. But the CEO raised a hand, stopping security. His eyes remained locked on the janitor. "You'd better have a very good reason," the CEO said coldly. "Because if you don't, this is the last day you step foot in this building." The janitor lowered his mop and took a breath. "I can't explain it yet, but I know something is wrong. Please don't drink it." The CEO's jaw tightened. His pride told him to dismiss the janitor instantly, to prove that no cleaner could dictate his choices. But a small voice in his mind, one that rarely spoke, urged caution. He slowly set the cup back on the counter without taking a sip. The room buzzed with whispers. Some thought the CEO was humoring the janitor. Others wondered if there was actually a reason to worry. The assistants exchanged nervous glances. For the first time, the CEO's morning routine had been interrupted in such a dramatic way. The janitor said no more. He went back to pushing his cart slowly out of the room, but his heart still pounded in his chest. He knew he had just risked his job, maybe even his daughter's future, since his paycheck kept her fed and in school. But he couldn't take it back now. He had spoken, and the CEO had listened. Behind him, The CEO stared at the untouched coffee cup. His hand rested on the counter, but he didn't pick it up again. Something about the janitor's warning lingered in his thoughts. Something told him this was not just paranoia. The assistants tried to break the tension by shifting the conversation back to business. But the CEO wasn't listening. He kept glancing at the cup. His gut told him there was more to this moment than anyone realized. And in that instant, a question formed in his mind, one that unsettled him deeply. What if the janitor was right? The morning moved forward, but the air in the office was different. Word of what had happened in the break room spread fast. Assistants whispered in hallways, workers at their desks leaned in close to each other, and by noon everyone knew. The janitor had stopped the CEO from drinking his coffee. Some laughed about it. Some rolled their eyes. Others stayed quiet, wondering what made a man risk his job like that. The CEO sat in his office, staring at the untouched cup now sealed in a plastic bag by security. His schedule was packed, meetings stacked one after another, but his mind kept returning to the moment the janitor had shouted. The voice hadn't been trembling or hesitant. It had been firm, almost commanding. That detail bothered him more than he wanted to admit. In the cafeteria, a group of employees sat around a table, gossiping. One shook his head. He's just a janitor, probably paranoid. Imagine thinking someone would poison the boss's coffee. A woman across from him frowned. Still, why would he yell like that in front of everyone if he wasn't sure? He's got a daughter, right? Single dad. You think he'd gamble his job on a hunch? The room fell quiet for a moment before someone laughed it off. Down in the basement storage, the janitor leaned against his cart, his hands pressed to his face. He knew he had crossed a line. Voices had followed him all day, some mocking, some curious. He told himself he didn't care. He had seen too much in life to ignore instincts. Still, the thought of losing his paycheck, of looking into his daughter's eyes and explaining why the bills couldn't be paid, made his stomach twist. That afternoon, the CEO called for him. Security escorted the janitor upstairs, their expressions unreadable. The assistant stood nearby, clearly expecting firing. The CEO leaned back in his chair, the city skyline behind him, and studied the man who had dared to interrupt his morning. "Do you know what you've done?" the CEO asked, his voice low but sharp. The janitor stood straight, his eyes steady. "Yes, sir. I stopped you from drinking that coffee." The CEO's eyebrow rose. "You're not a doctor. You're not trained in food safety. You're a janitor. What made you think you had the right to make that call in front of the entire staff?" The janitor hesitated, then spoke carefully. "I don't need a title to notice when something is wrong. I've seen things before. I've learned to trust my instincts. That coffee, it wasn't right." The assistants snickered under their breath. One whispered, "This is ridiculous." The CEO shot them a glare, and they fell silent. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "If I had taken that sip and nothing happened, do you understand what would have followed? You'd be out on the street. Do you have a family?" The janitor nodded once. "A daughter." "Then why risk it? Why put her future on the line? For what?" A gut feeling. The janitor's jaw tightened. "Because I'd rather risk my job than stay silent and watch something happen I could have stopped." The room went still. The CEO studied him for a long moment, searching for a crack in his confidence. There was none. His voice had no arrogance, only conviction. It unsettled the CEO more than he expected. Finally, the CEO leaned back. "Fine. I won't fire you. Not yet. But hear me clearly. If this turns out to be nothing, your time here is over." The janitor gave a small nod. "Understood." Security stepped back, surprised at the decision. The assistants exchanged shocked glances. Everyone expected the janitor to be gone by now, but instead, the CEO had chosen to wait. The janitor returned to his duties, though every corner of the office felt heavier. He could feel the stares of employees as he pushed his cart past desks and conference rooms. Some smirked, others gave him curious looks, but he ignored them all. Late in the evening, after most employees had left, the CEO sat alone in his office. He stared again at the sealed cup of coffee. He couldn't shake the janitor's words. Something about the confidence in his voice had planted a seed of doubt. He called one of his trusted contacts in security and gave an order. "Test it," he said simply. The man on the other end asked, "You think it's serious?" The CEO's eyes drifted to the city lights outside. "I don't know, but I want to find out." That night, as the janitor locked away his cart and prepared to head home, he had no idea his warning had already set something in motion. Something that would change everything. The next morning began like any other, but underneath the polished surface of the building, tension buzzed. The janitor arrived early, as usual, rolling his cart through the hallways. He tried to focus on his work, yet whispers still trailed behind him. Employees glanced his way, some with pity, some with amusement. To them, he was the man who shouted at the CEO over a cup of coffee. Some said he was a fool. Others quietly wondered if he had saved the boss from something darker. Upstairs, the CEO wasn't laughing. He had not touched coffee since the incident. He sat at his desk with a sealed envelope in front of him. His private security team had tested the suspicious cup overnight. The report lay inside. For a moment, he simply stared at it, his hand resting heavy on the paper, as though he already knew it carried bad news. Finally, he opened it. His eyes scanned the results. His jaw tightened. The coffee was laced with traces of chemicals, subtle but harmful, the kind that could have gone unnoticed until it was too late. The CEO's mind went blank for a second, then filled with a rush of thoughts. Someone inside the building had done this. Someone had tried to harm him. He pushed his chair back and stood, pacing by the window. For years, he had built his empire by trusting no one completely. But this was a direct threat. He replayed the janitor's words in his head. "Please, don't drink that coffee." It struck him again how sure the man had been. No hesitation, no stammer. Just certainty. By mid-morning, the CEO called a private meeting. Security chiefs, legal advisors, and one trusted assistant gathered in his office. The sealed cup sat on the table like silent evidence. "Test confirmed it," the CEO said flatly. "That coffee was tampered with." Gasps filled the room. One of the advisors leaned forward. "Do we know how it got here?" "Not yet," the CEO replied. "But we will." The assistant glanced nervously at the janitor's name mentioned in whispers. "Do you think he planted it?" she asked cautiously. The CEO's glare was sharp. "No. He stopped me from drinking it. If it weren't for him, we wouldn't be having this meeting." Silence fell. For the first time, the janitor's action was acknowledged as more than a nuisance. That afternoon, hidden cameras in the break room were pulled for review. Hours of footage were scanned until finally, something unusual appeared. A figure slipped in before dawn, placing the coffee on the counter, moving quickly, almost too quickly. The image was blurry, but the uniform was familiar. Not a stranger. Someone from inside the building. The CEO leaned forward, his eyes narrowing at the screen. "Find out who that is. And keep this quiet. For now." Meanwhile, the janitor continued with his tasks, unaware of the storm unfolding above him. He scrubbed floors, emptied bins, and replaced supplies, all while feeling the weight of eyes on him. He caught bits of conversation, people saying the CEO hadn't touched coffee since yesterday, that maybe the janitor had been right. But he stayed silent. He wasn't looking for thanks. He was only trying to make it through the day. Later in the evening, long after most workers had left, the CEO walked through the corridors alone. He found the janitor mopping near the lobby. For a moment, he just watched him. The quiet rhythm of his work, the simple care he put into even the smallest task. Then the CEO stepped closer. "Walk with me," he said. The janitor hesitated, then nodded, leaning his mop against the wall. They moved through the quiet building, footsteps echoing. Finally, the CEO spoke. "The coffee was poisoned. You were right." The janitor stopped walking, his eyes widening slightly, but he said nothing. He simply listened. "I want to know," the CEO continued, "how you knew. No one else saw it. No one else said anything. But you did." The janitor shifted uncomfortably. "I've seen things before. During my time, before this job. The smell, the way it looked. It wasn't normal. I couldn't stay quiet. The CEO studied him carefully. For the first time, he noticed something behind the tired eyes and worn clothes. Experience, discipline, maybe even scars the world couldn't see. "You may have saved my life," the CEO said quietly. "But this isn't over. Whoever did this is still out there. And I need to know why." The janitor met his gaze, calm and steady. "Then you need to start by looking closer to home." The CEO nodded slowly, the words hitting harder than he expected. For the first time, the balance between them shifted. The janitor was no longer invisible. He was the man who had seen what no one else did. And the truth was only beginning to surface. The following day, the atmosphere in the office was tense. People acted busy, but their eyes gave away nervous energy. The rumor had spread further. Everyone knew the suspicious coffee had been taken for testing, but no one knew the results. Whispers floated through the halls. Some insisted nothing was wrong. Others claimed something serious had been uncovered. The CEO arrived later than usual, his steps measured, his face stern. He went straight to his private boardroom where his security chief was waiting with new footage. The video had been enhanced overnight, sharpening the blurry figure who had placed the coffee. The CEO leaned in, eyes narrowing. The image revealed a uniform. Not a stranger, not an outsider. It was one of his own staff, a mid-level manager who had worked there for years, someone trusted. The CEO's jaw tightened. Betrayal cut deeper than any external threat. "Keep this between us," he ordered. "Not a word leaves this room until I decide." The security chief nodded, understanding the gravity. Meanwhile, the janitor was busy polishing the floor in the main lobby. Employees passed by, some offering him brief, curious glances. The mocking tone from yesterday was gone, replaced with quiet respect, though no one said it aloud. He noticed it, but he kept his head down. He didn't care about gossip. His focus was simple: do his work, earn his paycheck, take care of his daughter. That afternoon, the CEO summoned him privately. The janitor entered the office quietly, wiping his hands on his uniform. The CEO gestured toward a chair. "Sit." For a moment, the room was silent. The CEO studied him the way one studies a puzzle piece that doesn't fit. Finally, he spoke. "You were right. The coffee was tampered with. It wasn't a mistake. Someone in this building wanted me harmed." The janitor looked down at his hands, then back at the CEO. "I figured as much." The CEO leaned forward. "How? How did you know something was wrong before anyone else?" The janitor hesitated, then let out a slow breath. "Before I was a janitor, I served in the military. I worked in places where noticing small details kept people alive. The smell, the texture, even the way the cup was left out, it wasn't right. I couldn't ignore it." The CEO's eyes narrowed slightly, surprised but not showing it too much. He had assumed the janitor was just a man trying to make ends meet, invisible and unremarkable. Now he saw him differently. This wasn't a random outburst. It was the instinct of someone trained, someone who had lived through danger before. "Why didn't you ever say anything about your past?" the CEO asked. The janitor gave a faint smile, almost bitter. "Because no one ever asks a janitor about his past. People see the uniform, not the person wearing it." The CEO sat back, silent for a moment. His respect for the man grew quietly, though he didn't voice it yet. That evening, security confirmed the identity of the manager who had placed the coffee. When confronted, the manager panicked, claiming he was forced, that he had been threatened. The CEO listened but felt the sting of betrayal. The company was his empire, built on trust and control. And now he realized that danger had crept into his own walls. Later, he met the janitor again. "You should know," the CEO said, "the person who planted the coffee has been caught. Someone I thought I could trust. If it weren't for you, I might not be here now." The janitor gave a small nod. "I'm glad you listened." The CEO studied him carefully. "You've lived quietly, unnoticed, doing your job while others walk past without seeing you. But yesterday, everyone saw you, and they'll never forget it." The janitor shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do." The CEO's gaze softened for the first time. "That's exactly why it matters." Word began to spread through the company, this time not as rumor, but as fact. The janitor wasn't just a man who cleaned floors. He was the one who noticed what no one else did, the one who saved the CEO from something deadly. The perception of him began to change. People who had once overlooked him now looked twice, some even nodding with quiet respect. But in the janitor's mind, nothing changed. He still had a daughter to raise, bills to pay, and a shift to finish. Recognition wouldn't fill the fridge. But deep down, he couldn't deny it felt different walking through the halls now. And for the CEO, the incident left more than gratitude. It left a lingering question about the people around him, about loyalty, about the hidden lives of those he thought he knew. The truth was out. The danger had been uncovered. But one more step remained. The CEO had to decide how he would repay the man who had risked everything with just 5 words. Don't drink that coffee. The day after the truth came out, the office felt different. The usual rush of people carrying folders, tapping on keyboards, and whispering in hallways was there. But underneath, it was something new. Everyone knew now. The story of the poisoned coffee had spread beyond rumors. It was fact. And the janitor, the man who had been invisible for years, was at the center of it. The CEO had made his decision. He would not keep this quiet any longer. He wanted every person in that building to see the truth with their own eyes. That morning, he called for a company-wide meeting in the main hall. The staff gathered, confused at first, murmuring about what was happening. The janitor stood at the back, clutching his mop handle, not expecting what was about to unfold. When the CEO walked onto the stage, silence filled the room. He carried no notes, no presentation, just a sharp gaze and steady steps. He looked out at his employees, then down at the crowd until his eyes found the janitor standing quietly at the rear. "I want to tell you all a story," the CEO began, his voice echoing through the hall. "Yesterday morning, I was about to drink a cup of coffee that was waiting for me in the break room. Before I could, someone shouted for me to stop, loud enough to silence the entire room. The employees exchanged glances. Everyone knew who he was talking about. The CEO continued, his tone heavier. I didn't want to believe him at first. I thought it was nonsense. But I listened. And later, I learned that coffee had been poisoned. Someone in this company wanted to harm me. And the only reason I am standing here today is because one man had the courage to speak up when no one else did." Gasps rippled through the hall. People whispered, shock on their faces. The CEO raised a hand, silencing them again. "That man," he said, pointing to the back, "is our janitor. A single father. A man most of you pass by every day without noticing. But yesterday, he noticed something none of you did. He saved my life." The crowd turned as one, eyes landing on the janitor. He shifted uncomfortably, wishing he could sink into the floor, but the CEO wasn't done. "Come forward," the CEO commanded. The janitor hesitated, then slowly walked through the parted crowd, the mop still in his hand. People stepped aside, some patting him on the shoulder as he passed. He reached the stage, his heart pounding, but his face calm. The CEO put a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't just save me. You reminded us all that courage doesn't come with a title or a salary. It comes from character. And character is what makes this company strong." For a moment, the hall erupted into applause. It started small but grew louder, echoing off the walls. The janitor looked around, overwhelmed. People who had once ignored him now clapped, some even standing. His eyes watered, but he held them back. The CEO raised his hand again, quieting the crowd. "From this day forward, he is not just our janitor. He will have a new role here, one that reflects his value. And the company will ensure his daughter has her education fully supported. Because no man who saves lives should worry about feeding his family." The room erupted again, louder this time. The janitor lowered his head, humbled. He hadn't done it for recognition or reward. He had done it because it was the right thing. Yet here he stood, honored in front of everyone. Later, after the meeting ended, people approached him differently. They shook his hand. They thanked him. They asked about his daughter. For the first time, they saw him as more than the man with a mop. They saw him as someone who mattered. As he walked home that evening, the city lights glowing against the sky, he felt lighter. His daughter would never know how close they had come to losing everything. She would only know that her father had stood tall in a moment when it counted. And though he returned to his small apartment, pushing open the door to the sound of his daughter's laughter, something inside him had changed. He was no longer invisible. He was no longer overlooked. All because in one split second, he had found the courage to say 5 simple words. Don't drink that coffee.